You're listening to the AI Moment with me, Jonathan Wagstaff.
Me, Danny Denhard.
And Dan, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, we're going to use this as a part 2 of the real state of AI. So we're going to go through and have like more of an informal chat, so as if it's off mic, as Jonathan and I do. So we're going to talk around things like new releases and what it means. We're going to talk around enterprise AI adoption and whether there's ROI and if people are seeing it or not. Spoiler alert, some are, some aren't. Then we're going to go through governance. So do governments need to take more control? And is there governance around agents and what Agentic is and isn't doing? And then we're going to dive into SaaS. And lastly, we'll finish up on the future skilled workforce and whether AI is necessary or not and what layers that's going to impact. So Jonathan, let's dive in to the new releases and what they mean.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, we've seen actually in the sort of few days between us deciding to do this and doing it, there's been another set of releases. So we got rapid fire releases this spring from all the major players. They're all banging releases out at an unprecedented rate. And it's not just now about the fact the models are improving. What we're starting to see is a degree of specialization between the major players as well now. So I think we're seeing more and more of this kind of thing going on. And so our advice for the last year or two has been to people, it doesn't really matter which one you pick if you're starting, just pick one and start to use it. And that's probably still true for an entry-level person. If you're just starting, then it doesn't matter. But for people who've used it a little bit more now, we're starting to see a little specialization around Claude is good at, what ChatGPT is good at, what Gemini is good at, et cetera, et cetera. So, Anthropic are saying Opus 4.6 is really good, and I'm hearing it's really good for, analysis work, deep reporting work, sustained agentic work, coding, debugging, etc. Whereas ChatGPT is in a different space, but they're saying it's strong for coding. They're saying it's good tool use, good long context performance, etc. So they're starting to specialize a little bit, and there's no obvious winner at the moment. How are you seeing it, Dan?
Agree and disagree. So where I agree is we are waiting for these big waves of updates. But what I think is happening, or what I believe is happening, is I think a little bit more reactive. So I think that the consumer's always waiting for the next big wave of updates, as opposed to like an app update where you get small iterations. And I don't know whether it's deliberate or the way that they've had to train the models, but I often think what all of them are doing is waiting for one to go, then they benchmark it, and then they release something as big or equally as big. From what I understand within people who work in within those companies, it is a rumour mill. They all talk to each other. They all spread different bits of information to each other. So the specialisation of them is probably as likely as deliberate as in deliberately doing it, and deliberate that they're trying to diversify and be different from what the other models are making. I'm not always as convinced that they're separating and specializing, because 80 to 90% they all do the same thing. And that is whether it's a limitation of LLMs or it's the sort of state of play at the moment. There are mostly as good as each other. And once one gets good at it, the others tend to get as good at it, or they'll decide whether they really need it and if it's a differentiation point or not. I actually suspect we might go into more of an iPhone sort of cycle soon. There might be 2 to 4 big releases, but then I think there'll be one major one every year that people really stand out and look for. But I do think the demand for changing and evolving is coming from enterprise, and whether that's enough, I don't know. And I think that comes down to how we talked around ChatGPT. So one question that you and I often talk around is, do you kind of think with the new releases, this is the like agentic era for LLMs, or do you think it's something that might be just an add-on for these new releases?
I think that the direction of travel is definitely agentic. There's no doubt about that, and I think we'll see that even more in the next, through the second half of this year and the first part of next year. And you've said for a long time that you thought 2026 was the year where things really translate. I think there's a couple of practical things to your point, Dan. I think you're absolutely right. And I think we've seen for a while, the players sometimes try to spike each other. So the rumor is out in the market that OpenAI have got something really big about to happen. And so Anthropic have something they've got as well. And they kind of release it the day after or the same day to try and spike each other's. So they are tracking each other. What I think is interesting this spring is the pace of change. We've gone from 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5 with ChatGPT in about 4 months. And that pace of change is unsustainable for enterprises and medium-sized businesses, because no sooner can they get their head around a model than the next one comes out. And so, people like procurement and policy and the workflow design people are kind of, they're trying to work with a tool, and then the next one comes out before they've even finished doing that. So I think that might drive a slowing. I think we may well go to a model that you've just described, which is a big release every year and then little updates in between, because the enterprise guys will just want it to be working at that pace they can work at, and there's something they can respond to. And that's part of a broader question, across the piece. Technology moves so fast now that a lot of the legacy systems that have been designed by people can't keep up. And we've seen that in things like banking, we've seen other spaces. Absolutely true with this. So I think that it's a management problem more than it's a product problem in a lot of ways. But what I think that also talks to is, I agree with you that most of what's going on is common, but there is now starting to be differentiation. That last 20% is differentiating. But the choice of model, therefore, starts to be around, what is it I'm trying to do? What's the key thing for us? And therefore, which model might be the best suited one to do that?
If you were, say, Anthropic and you were releasing Claude, is there not a place or a school of thought that you'd say, you put your prompt in, you tell us what you want it to do, and then we'll choose the model. And if the output isn't good enough, we'll then offer you a slightly better or versions of output. So you're not running multiple models. The tool is picking the best output for you. Do you think that's something that they should be doing? Because, as you said, enterprise, it has to run at a certain pace. And if you're constantly changing things, it's really hard for you to actually invest time, effort, and resources into it, because you're actually fighting yourself. So do you think that's something that they'd think about or want to change?
Well, I don't know if they're going to, but I know I've worked with organizations where they're building that, or they have built a version of that, which is they've got a front end they've built, and it will synthesize the best models to do a task. So it will do a task, and it will talk to a number of different models, and it will synthesize the best result out. So I think that's, that makes obvious sense, doesn't it? If you've got a number of subtly different models, for the average business user, you don't want to be learning all those models all the time. You just want the right answer. So I think some kind of rendered front end, or some kind of agent that sits on top and decides which one to use, I think I'm starting to see that already with people. Are you seeing that, Dan?
Little bit. I would say that everyone's got personal preference, and once you start using a model and you get used to something and you're brought into it, it's really hard for you not to default to it. It's like human behavior. Again, it's like 101 human behavior. Once you start liking something, you don't really want it to change. Once it changes, for most people, it's hard to adopt to it. And if you've built any sort of workflow automation and it breaks, then or your custom GPTs, tasks, gems, etc., it's really difficult for you to adapt to it. I think now, and this is where I think Anthropic might actually beat a lot of the competitors, is because Mike Kruger used to be at Instagram, the CPO. And what that means is he really understands what humans want, what they like. And obviously they've got insights and user feedback data. But I think where his background might come into play is saying, actually, what we need to do is engineer it in such a way that it doesn't continuously break for users. And we can't make these sweeping changes, because small iterative changes helps users and helps them become better versus these big releases. So that's just my prediction. One area that I think is really interesting when we talk around the enterprise, it was reported just this morning that OpenAI missed all their internal metrics for the last 5 months. And they're really concerned around the revenue to actually pay for compute. So although they leaked it around Anthropic don't have the money or can't play out the long play for compute, it actually sounds like their CFO, who is brilliant by all accounts, is saying they're going to have there's going to be a challenging market for them. And these big releases sound great, but actually if the adoption level isn't as high or isn't helping as many people, internally that performance anxiety is going to kick in. So if you're not hitting those numbers, the number becomes almost like too much for a lot of these developers, the researchers, etc. So I do fear a little bit that it doesn't sound good, especially with two essential code reds, the CMO essentially having to step down for health and the CEO of apps having to step down or step away for health reasons. I have a little bit of a worry for OpenAI.
I'd agree. And going back to your previous point, I think I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that amongst the other things that Anthropic are doing is they've either developed or are developing a tool that says, if you've been really wedded to ChatGPT for a while, this tool just basically ports it all across and sets it up in Claude, which makes it easy to translate. Now, that's an old tactic. Microsoft did that in the 90s to get people onto the Office suite from, legacy products like WordPerfect and Lotus 123. But it's an effective tactic. And I completely agree with you that we are creatures of habit and we are creatures, we don't like change as a species. But what I think I have seen is a lot of people, me included, doing a lot more with Claude this year than we were last year. Last year I was pretty much 100% a ChatGPT guy, maybe 5% Claude and Gemini. Now I'd say it's probably 30 or 40% Claude, say 30% Claude, 30% Gemini, 40% ChatGPT, and trying to do horses for courses in terms of problem solving. So I agree with you. I mean, we've discussed before, I think I am worried for OpenAI. I think they may find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, really, as this whole thing develops. We know Google have got the strength to support what they've got to support. Claude seemed to be boxing clever. I mean, I would have been worried about Claude this time last year, but again, they seem to be boxing clever and seem to be heading in the right direction. I think that moral stance they took against the government seems to have won them a lot of friends in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. So there seem to be a lot of people who've switched to Claude on the back of that. And I think Sam and the guys at OpenAI, they've got some challenges. They're bright guys. I'm sure they'll work it out. But right now, like you, I've just worried a little bit for them.
Yeah, I agree. And it sort of tees us up nicely for the enterprise and AI adoption. And basically, the ROI question, like I always bang my drum a lot about it in last year and early this year. Are we really seeing, or are enterprise seeing ROI from AI yet, away from the headlines? So what do you think? Where do you think you've landed with it, or where do you think people you're talking to have landed?
Well, we definitely not. But I mean, there's some, I don't want to sit here and list out a load of reasons. We'll discuss it over the next few minutes, but we're definitely not. Enterprises are definitely not. There are some reasons for that in terms of how they've gone about it, and not realizing or trying to work out, to be fair to everyone, this is the Wild West. So they're trying to work out, how do we make this stuff work? I think the start point, as we've discussed before, is that before you even start with the tools, is to start to map your activity, map your workflows, work out exactly how your business works right now and all the things that happen through it. You can do that department by department. You can do it function by function. But really, the start point with any of these integrations is to start by saying, right, what exactly do we do? And as we've discussed before, that will actually reveal a load of inconsistencies already. And that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One is you'll find there are inconsistencies. So there's already value to be had in just cleaning out those inconsistencies in the way that you're operating. But the other thing that happens, and we'll get onto this later, is those inconsistencies actually form a governance break for the business. And when you clean out those inconsistencies and you then automate the processes move real quick. And so you better have good governance at that point, because if you haven't, it'll get unstuck pretty quickly. But we'll talk about that later. But for me now, there's a bunch of things, and most of the problems, Dan, and I'll come back to you in a second. Most of the problems are A, we're not mapping the workflows and actually, in other words, we're not getting to the point of saying what exactly is it we're trying to automate. And two, we're not really doing the human bit. We're not dealing with the fear that some people have. We're not got clear ownership of the problem. There's some legal friction. There's some IT friction in some businesses. They are the rollout. They're not things we can ignore. So the short answer to your question is no, we're not seeing enterprise ROI right now. There are some good reasons for that. I think there are some things we can look at about how people fix that. What are you seeing?
way that ROI is usually calculated is either super simple or actually really complicated. And I think it's going to get more and more complicated and more difficult for businesses, because the more output that they have, if it doesn't connect directly to a set goal, a strategic goal, it's going to be very difficult to prove that ROI. Therefore, if you're not really measuring it and not connecting it to something really important, and we know, having done it for as long as we have, we're both in the second or third decade of our professional career, what happens is if it's not measured correctly or not rolled up into something, the ROI will be challenged. Or actually what you're seeing is there'll be investments in other areas of the business, and you're seeing where the resources applied and then the deployments happen. If they're don't have a go-to-market or don't have a success plan, they're not going to be as successful as people are hoping. And the adoption might be high and the output might be high, but actually what we're seeing is it's not really making significant difference. There's a lot of noise, but there isn't a lot of ROI. So I think ROI is going to be really tricky for a lot of businesses to track away from reducing headcount and salary and applying it into token and development. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of businesses are going to have to go through. I think the cost of coding seems low. But if you go into the weeds with a lot of people at the moment, they're suggesting the cost of ballooning because they just don't know how to control it. So ROI is probably going to drop for a while. And my gut feeling is what we're seeing is with a lot of deployments is there's a lot of leaks, there's a lot of codes, and there's a lot of problems happening with the code because it hasn't gone through the same rigor as for the deployment process. It hasn't had the same QA, etc. So what we might actually see is worse code, and a lot of people are admitting this, that the worst code is getting deployed. Therefore, it means that there's going to be a lot more tech debt over time and a lot more problems that are going to have to be fixed. So I think the wastage is going to be important. And with the ROI with headcount, I know we talked around it in part one, but I just think with a lot of this, if it does replace tasks, great. And if it is automating a lot of the laborious things, great. But if people haven't been set up to succeed in it, like you said, if you don't have the right people around it and the right ways to measure success and implication, what we're probably going to see is this really big gulf between either small companies and big companies, or we're going to see junior people and really experienced people. And that middle part is often where the best piece of work happens and the development of people. And I just think that ROI some companies might see really good ROI and then it just tanks because they don't have the right people, the right bums in seats, they don't have the right level of experience. And those people without that gut feel, which very often is the guiding force for a lot of people, I think we might see that come back to hinder a lot of companies in the next 18 months or so.
I think there's a couple of things. One thing I think is absent just about everywhere is there's not. I think it's down to executives, and I'm talking about top level executives. Whether you're in a growing business or whether you're in the largest business in the world, if you're in Glaxo or Boeing or the leading executives have got to set the kind of future of work story. So they've got to tell the story of like, this is what this business is going to look like 5 years from now if we do it right. And they've got to set that so that people can see what the end goal is. Because at the moment, for the mass of the workforce, it's interesting to play with that AI, but mostly what they're hearing is it will take jobs away. So there's a huge fear there. And nobody's setting the vision. Nobody's setting nobody's putting the shining castle on the hill. So I think it's down to the senior leadership to really set the future of work vision. And then it's down to the middle management people to do the kind of execution on, okay, let's look, guys, let's all get together and work out where we can use AI to make things more efficient in our department, how we can start to move the business forward. So it's not just about cutting headcount, how we can achieve things that we can't currently achieve, how we can analyze data we can't currently analyze. So I think that lack of leaders really setting out the future of work in this business, the future vision for this business, is one of the reasons we're not getting ROI, because people are doing experiments. They're usually based on cost saving, as you say. They're not really visionary kind of, how do we really take this stuff forward? So I think that's one interesting bit. There was a really interesting LinkedIn post the other day by Hannah Eisenberg, who we know, and Actually, we're hoping that Hannah's going to come on the pod and do an interview soon. And Hannah made the point that it's really starting to feel like digital transformation was in the noughties. So that lots of people sort of came up with this, we're going to do digital transformation, and everyone jumped up and down. And lots of businesses didn't really get the return they thought they were going to get because of the way they went about it. And she said, she was at SAP at the time, and she said, this is feeling just like that. It really is. So there's a lesson from history there. We've been here before. What was interesting as well, and I think what might happen in some of the enterprise spaces here is, you may see a great big enterprise fail to make the transition well and fail to become a really ROI business, but you will see startups that become huge. You'll see startups that are AI native that will move into those spaces. So maybe the question isn't whether the big enterprises can transition. Maybe it's, can they defend themselves against the new wave of AI native incumbents into their space who disrupt, and we see things go that way. I don't know, Dan. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, big companies can move slowly and have smaller percentage increases and still win easily and still keep market share until obviously the startups really accelerate. And there's not many success stories within the space yet of smaller startups or upstarts coming in and really disrupting industries. Obviously, there's probably one or two, but they're like pure play AI. So I'm not as I'm actually quite positive around that happening. But when it comes to spend and investment and things like that, it's very difficult for startups at the moment that aren't pure play AI. So we will see a shift, and I hope that we do, and I hope that we do see more than productivity gains, which some people are reporting. The ROI question is going to be difficult. I've a fun little game for you then, Jonathan. What had more revenue last year? Was it GLP-1? So Manjaro and
Ozempic and all those guys, yeah.
Yeah. Or was it Anthropic and OpenAI?
So I'm going to guess it was the drugs.
4 times more.
40, yeah,
drugs.
Does not surprise
4
me.
times more, right? So I think that obviously enterprises, the ones that are spending the money on AI, but a lot of people would much rather more concerned around how they look in their health versus using AI. So I think this year might be an interesting gauge.
Well, it should be.
Yeah.
So exactly. We should be, Dan. We should be more concerned about our health and this AI nonsense.
And shall we jump into the governance piece? Should we jump into
go
control?
Let's talk about governance
and things like that. Big AI is lobbying very aggressively. There's a lot of contracts. There's a lot of fear around Department of Defense, etc. in the US. Where have you landed? What do you think? Because you're more of the governance side than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a news item a few days ago, which people might have seen, where somebody tried to firebomb Sam Altman's house, and he immediately responded with a piece where he said, "Look, the language is out of control. Let's all calm down. There's no need for this." And I understand why he wrote that. Obviously, somebody's firebombing your house. You try and calm matters down. But there's a couple of things going on. There's the big AI players have all said, this stuff is potentially life-threateningly dangerous. And, you keep seeing these pieces by people who've been in the AI, right at the core of the AI industry for 10 years. They're saying there's a 10% chance it could mean the end of humanity, or there's a 20% chance it could mean the... So you've got this kind of hyperbolic language going on the one, and it may be true, they may be right? But the point is they're hyping that stuff out there. So when you hype all that stuff out there, you can't be surprised when people get annoyed and irritated, and given the nature of 7 billion people on the planet, 1 or 2 extreme people think a firebomb's the right answer. So the AI guys have been hyping AI for a long time. They've also, the other thing that they've done is said the only way to stop that is for government to regulate us, because we can't self-regulate, because we're in competition with each other, we're in competition with other nations' AI initiatives. So we will not self-regulate because that's not competitive, but we accept that government should, again, Sam Altman, government should regulate. Government should put guardrails around the industry to save humanity. Now, then the next bit that happens, though, is whenever government tries to do that, then they're all spending huge amounts of money lobbying and trying to stop government putting the regulations in place. There's been a lot of money donated to the Republicans and a lot of their campaigns in the US in the last couple of years. And there's a lot of pressure on Trump and his government to deregulate AI as hard as they can. So although their public faces, yes, it could be dangerous and government should do something, they're actually trying to stop government doing anything. And although the public faces, everyone needs to calm down about AI, it's like, well, you're the people that hyped it all up for years and told us it could threaten civilization. So you can't be surprised, really. So that's kind of there's kind of an interesting set of things happening there, Dan. I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I've voiced my utter frustration with fear-based marketing from the big AI players. It's smart. Most big businesses, most big PR agencies will tell you fear is the biggest way to generate hype and generate buzz. As Rory Sullivan says, you buy a feeling, you don't necessarily buy a product. And I think what these big LLM companies have done for a long time is hype it up. So the one thing you want to be on is the train is the thing that makes the world seem like it's going to go bang. There's a couple of other areas which it really frustrates me is that you're going to get reaction when you have this narrative and you've built this train that's headed for you. And especially in the local areas where they're going to need these huge data centers, you're going to get reactions because you're going to take power away from people. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're taking a lot of that away from them. And you're also suggesting that your job's going to go at the same time. So if someone hasn't thought of the second and third order effects of this, that's on them. Like I have all the sympathy for no one should go through what Sam Altman has and some of the attacks that they have, but the spend on security is huge for these AI companies and tech companies in general. I think that they're applying this pressure deliberately because they know they can't be governed. They can't be governed. The US states won't agree on anything, let alone how they regulate it. The EU won't be able to agree on it. The UK 100% won't be able to. And Asia has a completely different take on what AI is. China's gone all in. Japan is slowly getting into it, but apparently, OpenClaw out there is huge. So everyone's going to have these different things. So they know that. And again, it's another spin, it's another marketing ploy. I worry a little bit that actually what will happen is innovation will slow down, and what we're going to get is people who have had their local lives and the areas disrupted, and everyone's just going to be like brand that cried wolf again, and then it will just have this knock-on effect around the whole industry, not just within AI. So that's my less than normal rant about it.
I think one of the interesting bits for me, and it's something that I used to talk about when I presented right at the start, shortly after ChatGPT was first released back in late 22, early 23. There's two lessons in history. Or there's, the question I was asked was around, is it good or bad for humanity? Well, first thing to say is that there's always been, throughout history, there's been people who talked about new technology, going all the way back to the printing press. The railways, these were all technologies that were going to shake, literally railways were going to shake us to death if they went over 60 miles an hour. The printing press, they said, well, if this all works, then peasants will be able to read, and where will we end up then? So there was always these doom. I think the last 100 years ago, approximately, we got nuclear technology. And nuclear technologies, like AI, extraordinarily dangerous, extraordinarily powerful, and can destroy civilization. But actually, as a planet, we learned to regulate that. So, yeah, there are still nuclear weapons kicking about, and they're not fun if you get on the end of one. But we've had nuclear medicine that's saved millions of lives in the last 100 years. We've had nuclear power that has powered a chunk of the planet and is part of the energy mix and will probably power more in the next 100 years. So with the right kind of regulation and international agreement, we can actually take a very dangerous technology and make it generally useful for society. Now, you may argue that was a function of a world that was much more inclined to collaborate, especially post-Second World War. People wanted to cooperate more, and you may argue that world is disappearing quickly. But in the last 20 years, we've seen what happens at the other end of the scale, and that's social media. So when social media first emerged, around about 20 years ago, I'm absolutely sure that all the people working in social media 20 years ago, or most of them, felt they were looking at a utopian future. They felt they were doing good. They were producing products that would allow people to connect and communicate, and that could only be a good thing. And of course, what's happened is all the stuff that's happened since, with disinformation and bot farms and social isolation and all of so we've got two lessons from recent history. One is, if you do regulate on a global scale, you can actually harness a dangerous technology. And the other one is, if you don't regulate, as with social media, you end up in some really dystopian places. And it's our choice with AI as a planet. At the moment, I agree with you. I think the US government appears to be trying to pull back from the states their any regulatory ability. They want to control it. And I'm not completely convinced, for all good reasons. The Chinese are flying away with it, as you say. Europe, we've got the AI Act, but it moved very slowly. So there's not a great deal of confidence right now that the planet is coming together to regulate this stuff.
I
We'll
think
have to see
like
what
you
that
said,
brings.
like you said, I think it's all power politics again. It's all governments didn't like the power that tech companies inherited over time, and they didn't know how to rein it in. They didn't know how to use it, and then realised it was a weapon for them. It was a tool that they could use and manipulate, and like the radio was, the newspapers were, TV was to an extent. So I think this is a power play it's power politics. The power play for governments is, if you're not going to have local players, which doesn't seem like a lot of European, non-US, non-Chinese there isn't like a power player in there yet, or if there will be. And what that means is, how do they try and regulate it? How do they try and govern it? And especially when it comes to agents, there's so much control that's going to be needed. There's so many if this then that, like conversations that happen. There's just not enough people who know enough about it at that level to really govern it and control it. My real fear is, once the government start to, we're going to get to this point where someone who wants to win and wants to be the highest power, Sam Altman or another, will just ignore it, and they'll release something super powerful just to say, hey, we are this powerful, try and control this. So I think that's at play. What do you think around the agents and governance around agents and the impact that agents are going to have? Obviously, we've had all the new deployments from the LLMs, the big LLMs, which has made automation much easier, much more accessible, not as harder to govern. So where have you landed?
Okay, well, just before we get to that, I mean, to the point you were just making about people like Sam Altman or etc., how do we control it? I've not got any big answers. I think one answer could be around, if we look at the nuclear question I was just talking about, they then became a question of governments agreeing to control who had enriched uranium and making sure that only the people that they wanted to have enriched uranium got it. And if somebody emerged like Iran who was starting to produce it, then they would put controls in place. The one place you might be able to do that with AI is in the chipsets. So you're absolutely right. If everyone's got access to AI tools, then there's a million billion people in their bedrooms doing things, you can't control it. It might just be possible to say, we want to know exactly which organizations have got the chipsets and control them in some way or regulate them in some way. But as you say, if they go rogue at that point, especially if they're really big, then what happens then? So, there's an ongoing debate there. To your question about the governance bit, Dan, I think the challenge right now is that people are starting to plug agents. An agent in itself is not a uniquely dangerous thing, but the challenge is that they're being plugged into quite messy environments at the moment. So people are letting an agent go into an environment where there's weak access control, poor credential handling, messy processes, informal workarounds. So we're back to what we were saying earlier about governance. That the agents are starting to expose areas of weak governance in businesses. And the thing then is that, as we discussed earlier, if you've got a workflow that's a human workflow, there's probably enough inefficiency in that workflow that any kind of potential thing going out of kilter gets trapped and caught by the workflow, because there's time to do that. If you've got an agent executing that workflow in seconds instead of days, those things are going to go out of kilter really quickly. And if you've got this whole idea of, something like OpenClaw, where you've got an agent which has got permissions to get some of your data and is vulnerable to prompt injection, then you've got two things going on there. One is your messiness in your own organization renders you vulnerable, and two is a malicious actor can then do an awful lot of damage very, very quickly. And I don't think we're across that yet as an industry, as a nation. I don't think we're across that yet. That's my take. What do you think?
Humans have two things that are innate in them: a look to save time, because we know time is against us every day, all the time. We can't get it back. And we're looking for convenience. Anything that provides convenience to us, most of the time people take shortcuts. Lazy people are lazy, cheats are cheats, right? It's what human nature is. It's whether we're self-aware enough or not to understand. And what we've got to at a point now is we've got a really powerful technology in the hands of people who don't quite understand it, or understand it enough to know its power. And then they're just loading up these agents and these bots to go out and try and do things that they want it to do. And it's only as good as the inputs they've put in, like LLMs, so garbage in, garbage out. And AI at the moment is average of average. You want something that the output generally is going to be average unless you prompt, reprompt and engineer it. Therefore, what that all means and culminates in is people are going to be using and unleashing this technology and using it in ways that they haven't necessarily thought through. AI isn't programmed to tell you about the second and third order effects. And I've seen it even with someone in my peer group within the marketing and product world who let OpenClaw loose on their work laptop, and then a lot of bad things happened. And they are fairly sophisticated. They're quite technical. It's a real steep learning curve, and I'm very surprised that this person kept their job because of it goes against all the usage. This is going to happen in big companies, and the impact that it's going to have is going to be far greater. And just think, if someone that I know, it's happened to someone I know, and I know people that have had crypto wallets exposed, etc., it's going to happen at scale. And if you listen to the TED talk that the OpenClaw creator said, Peter said, a lot of it wasn't designed for the scale and the mass use that it's had. So he hasn't been able to put the guardrails up, and people know that, so they're exposing it. And when there's opportunity to exploit things, us humans are known to do it. So I'd be very mindful of it. And I actually think this is going to play into the governance side. I do think there will be government figures who understand it, or what happens to their peer group, and then it becomes a major, topic or point of conversation. And I do worry for countries like India that have gone all in and been given a lot of it for free because of the usage. So there's well over a billion people. And what we're seeing is it's really impacting their power and their networks. So I do actually worry for countries who are desperate to be technology leaders, who go all in, but actually will start killing infrastructure. And we're seeing that already. So I expect that to happen. I expect large companies to embrace the technology, but actually in different ways to what we're seeing for now. I would love people to really understand and truly get under the skin of claws of agents and automation, because a lot of known companies like IFT and Zapier and that are building these probably slightly more secure ways of using it. And these big companies like Anthropic and OpenAI are building it so you use it. They're not building it so they've built the infrastructure to stop you from being attacked, stop you from being socially engineered. So be super mindful. Like I haven't used it yet. I won't put it on my laptop. I'm not going to buy another computer to use this technology yet, because it's just not in a safe space to use it. So just be really mindful.
Yeah, and I think that we're back to what we were saying earlier at the start of today's show, where it's going to be about those sorting out your workflow, sorting out all of the sort of governance, validation practices, your operating disciplines before you start to deploy this stuff. So you've done it as a logical exercise on paper and said, where do we think the holes are? Let's fix them. How do we work? then you probably run it in some kind of sandbox, as you say, and let's just make sure it can't go and do anything too dangerous before you deploy. And you're absolutely right, Dan, in that the instinct to deploy quickly and conveniently is strong, but it's got to be, uh, it's like a junior person learning to drive, isn't it? They've got to do driving lessons and their driving tests before you let them loose on the road. It would be stupid beyond belief to give a 14-year-old kid a car and say go. So it's an analogous thing to that, isn't it? We've got to do our internal equivalent of the driving lessons and driving test on the agent before we let it loose on the company systems, because the power that makes it so efficient and powerful and valuable to us is equally going to work against us if if a bad actor gets hold of it and we haven't secured it properly and we haven't done the right things. It becomes a very powerful tool to attack us with.
I'm super conscious that I've been probably more negative and more on the downside of AI today than the positive side that I'm usually am. And I think that's just because there's a lot of, they're saying about rolling the boulder up the hill and you have to get it to the top to roll down. I actually
Sisyphean task, Dan. A Sisyphean task, they call it.
Thank you for the for that one
That's
for the
education
name of
there.
it. Yeah. But I do think there's these bumps in the road that are happening, and a lot of people are letting the boulder roll over them rather than actually build infrastructure or build something around them. And I think it's hugely powerful technology, and in the right hands it's great. In the wrong hands, it's just going to be another manipulation tool. So I'm just conscious that we've got quite a way in, and I sound doom and gloom. I'm not. I want some people to be realistic and give the right messages out, as opposed to just overhyping that's happening everywhere at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think you're sounding particularly negative, if I'm honest, from my point of view. And one of the key purposes of this pod is to give people practical advice, isn't it? To talk about the world as we see it, as two practitioners in this space, and we're working with businesses that are trying to get their heads around it. And as I said at the start of the pod, it's the Wild West out there, so we're all kind of learning together. And so I think part of that, obviously, is if we were just waving the flag for AI every week, that would not do justice to the people who listen to the pod. So I think we have to be practical about where the opportunities are and where the threats are, what the potential is, and also what the potential downsides are. So I think it's fair to talk about those things. Talking of which, we have a number of big companies this spring as we look back through the first part of 2026. If you were a big software as a service house, you've probably seen quite a dent in your share value this spring, have you not?
Yeah, the SaaSpolcalyse, as people are calling it, has really hit a number of companies. HubSpot is one that has been hit pretty hard, and they're a company that have gone almost all in on AI. I think actually SaaS was flooded and it was almost oversaturated, and it's kind of that plateau. It's gone back to where some people thought it might end up anyway. But you've really seen them feel like they've been exposed because people have had the feeling that they can go and vibe code, they can code something themselves which will use their own CRM system. But what that's actually enabled these big companies to do is take a step back and understand what their benefits are. And what that is, they can build, there's the security infrastructure in there. They've got the insurance and all the other things that when something goes wrong, they're protected. And I do think there is this world where a lot of companies are building something for 2 or 3 people, and that's great, but then it doesn't scale out. And I've seen it with an AI company that I'm connected to, who created something themselves, and then there wasn't the mass adoption that they were hoping internally. So then they've had to go back to a very well-known SaaS company. They're like 2 very different stories that are happening, but 2 that are playing hand in hand.
Yeah, I think for me, it's there was certainly that little wave of things, wasn't it? I mean, if we've got to remember what does a stock price on the US stock market, what does the stock price represent? The stock price is really a measure of how confident investors are in the future. So it's almost, well, as we know with a number of these valuations, it's not a measure of your value today. It's a measure of how confident people are that you've got a really bright future. And I think there's been 2 little waves of this. The first wave is exactly as you just described. And we saw people saying, well, I can build my own little CRM here. I can vibe code a CRM in a day. I saw a number of people, I mean, 1 or 2 companies seem more vulnerable than others. Tableau seemed to get quite a kicking back in January, February. I saw a number of people saying, well, I've just vibe coded a reporting tool and now I can get rid of my $250,000 a year Tableau contract. So there's a bunch of that, but pretty quickly, as you say, Dan, people got to the point, well, that's great that you've done a Sunday afternoon exercise to write a CRM, but you now have to maintain it on a weekly basis and you have to scale it and all that stuff. So people pretty quickly retrenched to actually, we will go and buy HubSpot or Salesforce, or we will go keep using Oracle or whatever it was. But I think what we've now seen is the second wave, which is people saying, well, yeah, okay, but as we get more agentic, we now know that we can now scale the business to 3 times its current size without increasing the headcount because the agents will help us do that. So that's now we're talking about the future. So now where HubSpot and Salesforce might have thought, well, as all these businesses grow, they'll grow the number of seats they buy because they'll be employing more people. It's now clear that might not be the case. And I think most of the concern around the future of the SaaS companies now is about you're not going to grow seats like you would have done historically. So a lot of these companies may double, treble in size, go 4, 5, 6 times the size without increasing the headcount. And that seat compression, as they're calling it, is the thing that's worrying people in terms of the growth of revenue in some of those SaaS companies. And I think that's the thing that's a bigger problem.
But they're also changing their pricing models. So it's cost per resolve, or rather than it being cost per seat or data records, which was the CRM's way of ripping you off. It's less about records. It's more about outputs or solutions or campaigns. So they have changed and adopted the way that, the way they've done it. I haven't worked in SaaS and worked with SaaS companies. There was a lot of people internally saying, I told you so. So there's a lot of people saying, we can innovate far more quickly. There are a lot of other ways we can bring different features to market. You don't have to go low and slow. We can actually be far more aggressive in it. And I guarantee you, and I know for a fact, there are people saying, told you so, told you so.
Yeah, I think if you look at HubSpot as an example, when HubSpot first emerged, 15, nearly 20 years ago, the marketing product was the first product. And that was, as you say, you were charged for the number of records you had in your database. And the more records you had, the more you paid. So it wasn't based on seats or users or any of that kind of stuff. As they introduced more products, they started to do seat pricing. So when things like Sales Hub came along, that was on a per seat basis. We're now seeing with the AI tools, we're starting to see a sort of token use model there. So there's quite a hybrid pricing model at HubSpot right now. And they're by no means alone. All the other players are doing similar kind of things. But I think they all are trying to scramble around and work out, is there an outcome-based or orchestration value or some kind of I've heard an agent tax talked about, which is like, we're gonna charge agents like seats. So if you've got 3 people and 20 agents in your workflow, then we're going to charge you an agent. I don't know. They're all still trying to work that out. But per seat model charging clearly has got a limited future. And I think they're all looking for where the golden nugget might be in terms of how they price that stuff.
I think the good thing is to the listeners is there's probably a lot more negotiation that can be had. And there's probably a way to reduce some of the actual costing from these changes. So they won't say if seats are switching or you're reducing the number of records, things like that. There's probably a good chance that you can negotiate a much better rate or not have the annual increase as often or as high as and aggressive as it once was. So there's probably a lot of potential for listeners to negotiate or shop around probably a little bit more easily.
Yeah, may well be the case, Dan. And I know the other thing that's happening, I was talking a couple of weeks ago to somebody who's very senior in a SaaS company. He said they are now working hard on where's their moat. What if we look at this new world of some people trying to vibe code bits of it and some people looking at seat compression, that they are working very, very hard on where is the moat around the business now. We know where it used to be. Where is it in the new world? And that's something that they'll be focused on. From HubSpot to Salesforce to anybody else you want in that space, they'll all be working on that quite a lot.
That would be a really good pod, actually. The moats within AI era. I think that's definitely a dedicated pod that we should dive into. Should we dive into like a rapid fire on the future skills for the workforce and for professionals?
Go ahead.
Something you've said is around the cognitive debt and actually the understanding how people should learn, where the skills should develop. Let's dive into that a little bit and do it. And if you do it quickly, and then we'll do rapid fire recommendations. I think will be a good way to wrap up.
Sure. So, well, I mean, the cognitive debt really. So it's a question of we start to outsource our thinking, don't we? If we're not clever, it means that we have access to much higher levels of analysis than we ever have. Everybody has access to these tools that can do a lot of thinking quickly, a lot of analysis quickly. So our back to your point earlier, our willingness to outsource that kind of thinking to these things, it's easy to do. It's easy to hand over your thinking, but actually that's not what we should be doing. What we should be doing is using that stuff to support and sharpen our thinking. And the challenge around that is particularly the biggest thing we're hearing in society is what happens if AI takes over all those low-level jobs, all those entry-level jobs in professions like accountancy and law, where we spend 10 years working in the bottom end of the industry to learn the industry, and then we get into the higher positions. Well, if AI can do all those low-level and analytical tasks, what happens to the future of those industries? How do they get those people to be trained to the point when they can become senior accountants, senior lawyers? There are a couple of things that spring to mind when we talk about that, Dan. What do you got?
Yeah, I'd say training's critical, whether that's with AI or not. I think training and coaching is going to be critical. I think coaching is going to be, and exec coaching is going to be more and more important as time goes on, because your head will tell you something, your heart will tell you something else, but your gut is something that you listen to most, and it's going to be questioned a lot from AI. So I definitely would look to bring in that and have that as a tool for you. AI isn't geared for second and third order thinking. It's just not. It's engineered for engagement and trying to complete certain tasks. So actually, if you're really thoughtful and you can roll out a skill set, second and third order thinking, and actually training and coaching people on how to think that way, and really go deep into first principles, I think is something that AI is going to really struggle with. When humans make errors, it's human error and it's acceptable. When AI does, it's not acceptable. And we've seen this society already, and I think that's going to continue. So what we might see is people and professionals who are pushing their teams to use more and more AI, error rate might go up, and it's going to be more and more unacceptable for that to happen. So at some point there will be this battle between whether it's a human error or an AI error, and I'd just be mindful of that. And as I said earlier, human behaviour, everyone looks for convenience, everyone looks to save time. So lazy will be lazy on it, and that's something that you can handpick with the teams and the team members. And at the moment, people are leaning towards good enough versus good, better, best, or greatest. And my biggest bugbear at the moment is if you're not putting that up quickly enough, good enough is going to turn you into a bland and not a brand, and it's going to hinder you. So
Yes.
That's something I want you to really think of your high standards and keeping that, and that's come up in recent conversations. And just to wrap up my AI tech part, AI is the average of average. So it's learned from all the best and all the worst of the internet, and it's buying training data from all different sources. So AI isn't going to be uniquely brilliant at anything unless you're picking and hand selecting the sources it can pull from. So just be really mindful of that. And AI still struggles with numbers. So all of these things are where it's getting better and better, but it still struggles. So all these things are where you can be either uniquely good at or uniquely aware of to build on top of that. So I just think with a lot of this, the future skill workforce is going back human and then plus AI, as opposed to what some people think is AI plus human. I think it's going to be the complete opposite.
Well, I think what smallest organizations will do, I mean, it's back to what we've said a few times, is that my own belief, as you know, is that I don't think AI will replace jobs, it will replace tasks. And so you do end up with the ability that maybe 3 people are doing the work that 6 people would have done, can grow to twice the size without growing the headcount. The danger is that the convenience of AI erodes the mental repetition that builds capability. All those things that we do as a junior accountant, junior lawyers, you do the first draft, you spot the mistakes, you learn the patterns, you get things wrong, but you're under supervision of a senior person. And then you improve, and then you get to the point where you can be senior. I think you can still have all that with the AI. So that junior person using AI to do certain tasks, but owning the output, is still going to be capable of learning all the things they need to learn over that period of time, probably quicker. So if you're using AI to take away some of the more, I don't know, the more time consuming research, that sort of stuff, then it's actually could be potentially a good thing. But what those organizations are going to do is say, we're not going to replace people with AI here. We're going to augment people with AI. It'll be a smaller number of people than we would have done, but they will be coming up the curve and learning. And that's where the future leaders come from. Now, that takes some vision, it takes some courage, but I'm convinced it's the right answer.
The more that AI develops, the more the industry evolves, the more that people go around the automation and agent first route, the more that really smart people will understand the power of it and when to use it and when not to. So if I was to leave anyone with a thought, is let's just really be mindful and understand where humans are going to drive real change and be the thought leaders, and use gut, because that's the one thing that AI will really struggle to replicate.
Yeah, and if AI strips out too much of that junior developmental layer, absolutely organizations would be more efficient in the short term, but they'll be less capable in the long term. And you've got to keep your eyes on the long term. That's what we're saying about the future of work. Same idea. The leaders of those organizations are going to be saying, this is what we look like in 5 or 10 years' time. This is the roles we can all play. This is the role AI will play. It's about some visionary oversight and a clear view of the long-term future of the organization.
Exactly.
Are we done? I think we're done, aren't we?
Yeah, I think that was packed full of information. With every episode, we share a newsletter. It will condense this down a little bit. So if you want to go back, I'll add timestamps. So if there's a certain part you want to re-listen to, you can go back to. And part 1 was equally as action-packed and full of nuggets. So highly recommend, if you missed part 1, to go back, and I'll embed and link it back in the newsletter.
Great stuff, Dan. Enjoyed that conversation. Thank you for that.
Likewise. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today, everyone. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating and review in any of the podcast players. We have a supporting newsletter, which is aimoment.co.uk, that comes out on Mondays and Fridays with every pod, and we dive a little bit deeper. So please subscribe there. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.